Hello, everybody. Welcome again to take two of this live webinar. I see we've got a few people coming in to the room already, which is great. So just a couple of things to get us started. Apologies for those who came to the last live webinar and we had to stop it midway through. We had issues with our with the webinar software we were using, and now I'd like to say that I think that won't happen again. However, Debs and I tested this last week, and we switched machines and we used a different internet connection and everything, and it was working absolutely fine. We're doing exactly the same thing today, but in the last half an hour we've been testing and we have experienced a couple of minor blips. So if there are any issues, or if things do cut out, then have a look in the chat on the right hand side, because that's where we'll be sort of making any announcements or anything like that. So thank you so much for everyone who's come along. It's actually a bank holiday in the UK today, so thank you those who've given up any sort of bank holiday, public holiday to join us also. Today's webinar is on 10 functions you have to know in Excel. I won't go through my full preamble because I've already done it. And so we'll try and keep it briefer. A few bits of housekeeping though that I think you just want to know. So do pop your name and where you're from in the chat on the right hand side. I see people have been doing that already, which is great. Lovely to see so many people saying hello already. So do let us know where you're from in there. It's great to see so many people from all around the world. And we will check, and we'll keep checking as we go along, that everyone can see and hear us. If you can't for any reason, again, do check the chat, because we'll be sort of announcing anything in there. Because what happened last time was the sound cut out, but the chat was still working, so we were able to exchange messages and stuff in the chat, but the sound was where we had the issue. And yeah, advice is watch this on using Google Chrome, or Firefox, because they're normally the best browsers to go with. And then if you are having some issues, just go out of the webinar software and come back in. That sometimes fixes some minor issues that you might be having. There will be a recording, so if we do have issues and this cuts out, do not worry. We will record this offline and send it around to everybody. So if the worst does happen and this does end up cutting out again, then we will record it offline and send it around to everyone. Additionally, if all goes well, which we hope it does, and touch wood, then we will send this recording around straight after it gets sent out, about 24 hours afterwards, automatically to everyone that's registered. So that will be on there as well. So there will be a recording. The normal bits of information about us. I think most people are probably on the last webinar, so you may know us. We've got a couple of brands, Simon Says It and streamskill.com. We are now 11 years old. We're used all over the world by hundreds of thousands of people. We've got a very popular YouTube channel as well, so do check that out. It's the channel is Simon Says It on YouTube. So who's talking to us tonight? Well, it is the one and only Deb Ashby, the Countess of Countiff, as I introduced her last week. And of course, yeah, big royal news in the UK with Harry and Meghan's baby today. So I'm sure that hasn't made it into the webinar, but loads of very interesting stuff has. Deb's got tons of experience. She's absolutely fantastic at Excel. She really knows her stuff. And yeah, you're definitely in for a treat. The final thing from me, and I missed this last time, so I've been more organized, is we actually have the file that Debs will be using, and I've just shared that in the data sharing section on the right hand side. So as an alternative to chat, there's a few other things. Yeah, you should be able to see. Yeah, should be able to see that. Right, I'm going to hand over to Debs now. Debs, do take over the screen, and feel free to take it away.
Lovely, thank you, Adam. Let me just switch to my screen. Just bear with me. Great. Now, hopefully you can all see me and hear me. Let me just minimize that down and pull up my agenda for today. So welcome, everyone. Take 2 of top 10 functions or formulas in Excel. Thank you so much to everybody who's joining us again. Technical problems, they're the bane of our lives. I've got my fingers crossed very hard today, so hopefully we're not going to have any issues. Now, let's just jump straight into the agenda that we're going to be running through today. So this is quite a broad topic, and when I was trying to prepare for this, it's actually quite a difficult thing to prepare for, because what some people consider to be the most useful formulas or functions in Excel, that kind of tends to differ from person to person. It really does depend on the kind of tasks that you do and also the industry that you work in. However, as I was doing my research, there were the same kind of formulas and functions that came up time and time again. And if I was just to write a list of 10 that I find really useful, a lot of these would be in there as well. Now, if you're new to my style of training, the way that we do things here, I do live demos. So you've got the file, which you can follow along with later to the recording of this webinar. And we're really going to start from the beginning. I never like to assume that you know anything. So we're going to start with the very basic, and then we're going to move through to some of the more complex formulas and functions. But all of these are really, really useful functions that you can utilize in your daily work. So we're going to start out with what I like to call the big 5 functions. So those would be your simple, basic functions, things like sum, average, min, max, count. So I'm going to go through those, but I'm going to show you different ways that you can use them just to increase your efficiency when you're working with formulas and functions. So we'll start there. And we'll then move into just talking a little bit about absolute versus relative referencing. Now, this isn't really a function as such. It's just sort of a way of doing things in Excel. But the reason I'm throwing it in is because it is so important that you understand completely the difference between absolute and relative referencing. I'm going to be using it a lot throughout the session, so I want to make sure that you have that basic level understanding of exactly what that is. So we will cover that very briefly as well. We'll then move into some of the really useful text functions that you can use. And these are particularly good for things like if you do a lot of data analysis, if you need to sort of clean up or tidy data, there's a lot of really helpful text functions there. And then we're going to jump into a function called PMT, which stands for payment. And this is quite a specific function, which is used to calculate loan payments. So it's particularly useful if you work in the financial services industries, but it's also very useful from a personal point of view. So if you do like your own home finances, this can be something which can be really helpful if you're trying to calculate how much you need to pay on your mortgage each month, or if you want to take out a loan, how much the payments are going to be. So I'm going to throw that one in, and we're going to combine it with a little bit of a goal seek thing as well, so you can see how that works. We'll then move into some of the more complex formulas. So we're going to start out with if statements and nested ifs. And if you've never used them before, then they can be a little bit intimidating, but they're actually quite simple once you break them down. So we're going to start with the simple ones, and then we're going to move up to some more nested ifs. And again, if you're not 100% sure what I'm talking about there, it will become clear as we go through the demonstration. We'll then move on to what's possibly my most favorite function in Excel. Surely I can't be alone in loving VLOOKUPs. This is probably one of the functions I use most often. And again, it's one of those functions that people, if you're not sure how to do it, it can seem complex. But again, if you break it down, it's actually very simple to use. So I'm going to show you how to do VLOOKUP in a couple of different ways. And I'm also going to show you how to do HLOOKUP, which is kind of like its sister function. And then in the final example, we're going to go a little bit more complex, and we're going to supercharge our lookups using index with the match function. And these are two separate functions, which I'll show you how they work individually, but they become really powerful when they're used together. Okay, so this is what we're going to go through. And I think probably we've got more than 10 functions there. And as we go through the session, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw in some useful tips and tricks and just things which are going to make you more efficient when you're working in Excel. Hopefully that sounds good to everyone. Let's jump into our example. So let me come out of here and I'm just going to jump across to Excel. All right, lovely. Okay, so I have a myriad of tabs at the bottom there, and I've color-coded them to try and kind of group the same kind of ones together. Now, what we're going to start out with, as I said, is we're going to start really, really basic. And what I always like to do, first of all, is just to explain to you the data that you're looking at, because I look at this data all the time. It makes perfect sense to me. But when you're seeing something for the first time, your eyes are kind of all over the place. So what we have here are, and I believe this is I think it's the 100 greatest selling albums or best-selling albums of all time. So you've got the usual suspects in there, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Bob Dylan, so on and so forth. So what we're looking at here is we have the year, we have the album name, we have the artist, the genre, the subgenre, and then the total sales. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might be thinking, well, I'm pretty sure Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band sold more than 2 million copies. It probably did. These are just random numbers that I've put in here, so don't get too caught up on the accuracy of these. But I just want to use these total sales just to show you some examples of some of these, what I call the big 5 functions. These are probably the first functions which you've ever learnt in Excel. And as I said, we're going to twist them a little bit and we're going to do them slightly differently in each scenario. So let's start really basic. Now, sum. I'm sure we're all used to using the sum command. Sum will basically just add up a range of numbers that you select. So with all formulas, you start out with an equals. That tells Excel that you're about to type a formula. And you can just type in the name of the formula. And you'll see underneath, Excel provides a helpful list of everything that starts sum. And as I said, there are I think over 450 different functions in Excel. So I'm going to open my bracket. And again, underneath, what you get is a helpful little guide which tells you what it's expecting you to input into here. So all I need to do for my sum calculation is tell Excel what range of cells I want to calculate or what I want to add up. So in this case, I'm adding up the total sales. So I could highlight my range of cells just here. I find it quicker to use a quick keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to click in the first cell, F2, and I'm going to press Control-Shift down. And that will highlight all of that data range for me, so I don't have to drag all the way down. That's particularly useful if you have a very, very long data set. It's just a quick way of getting all that data into your range. Control-Shift-Down key. If you look at the formula bar now, where you can see the formula, it's got that cell range. So now all I need to do is close off my bracket or parentheses and hit Enter. And I get my sum calculation just there. Hopefully that's something you're all reasonably familiar with. Let's take a look at average, and we're going to do this a slightly different way. So average, again, just to recap, will give me the average for a range of cells that I select. Now, I could do it exactly the same way by just going in and typing in average. I could do it that way. But this time, I'm going to use the function dialog box. And you can pull that up. You'll find it here next to the formula bar where you have this little FX icon. And as you hover over, it says Insert Function. This is like a little helper box. So you can come in here and you can search for whatever function it is that you're looking for. So if I want to find the average, I can just type into the box here, average, click go, and it will pull up all of my average functions. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to select the top one. And again, it gives me a dialog box. So it's a slightly different way of doing the same thing essentially as what we did in the sum function. So now I can select my cell range. So again, I can just click on the top one there, Control-Shift down, and I get my cell range F2 to F501 and click on OK. and now I have my average. So same result, just done in a slightly different way. You can see up there in the formula bar, it's exactly the same as what we did when we typed in the sum function. Next one, min. Let's do this a slightly different way. Now, with min, this time we're going to use one of the buttons on the toolbar. So I'm going to stay on the home ribbon, and I'm going to go all the way across to the editing group, and you'll see I have an auto sum button. And if I click that drop down, I have those top 5 functions in there, and one of them is min. Now, if you've never used min before, all min does is it will give you the lowest value in a range of cells. So we're going to keep this consistent, and we're going to use our total sales column again. So I'm going to select min, and immediately it's picked up the data directly above it. That's what Excel will do. It will go for the data that's nearest to it. And of course, you can change that. So again, I'm going to click that top cell, Control-Shift down arrow, and hit enter. And that gives me my minimum value in that range that I've selected. So that's the third way that you can do it. What about max? Now you can probably guess if min gives you the lowest value in a range, max is going to give you the highest value in that range. So again, I could do this in any of the ways that I've already shown you. I could type in equals max and I could select my cell range, but let's do it in a slightly different way. And I find this is helpful just to kind of cut down on the amount of cells that I'm having to select. So what I'll do sometimes is I will name my ranges, and then I will use that named range in my formula. And that's what I'm going to do here. So instead of selecting the total sales cells, before I start to do my calculation, I'm going to name this range of cells. So let's click at the top, Control-Shift down to highlight them all, and I'm going to give this cell range a name. Now, if you've never named ranges before, it's really simple. You just select the range of cells, and then over on the left-hand side, you'll see currently where it says F2, if I hover over, you get that little name box. So I can click in the name box, and I'm going to call this total underscore sales. Now, it's worth remembering when you are naming ranges that you can't have any spaces in between the names, which is why I've separated them with an underscore. So let's hit enter. And I've now named that range, so I can use that name in my calculation instead of highlighting those cells. So if I'm trying to find the maximum value in this range, I can do equals max and open my bracket. Now, instead of highlighting that cell range, I can just type in the name of that range. So I called it total, and you'll see as I start to type it, it's brought up. There we go, total underscore sales. So I can double click to select. And you can see it's highlighted that cell range. And I can close my bracket, enter, and I get my max value. So again, that's a slightly different way of doing it using a named range. Let's now do the count using that named range, but again, we're going to do it in a very slightly different way. So if you've never used count before, what count does is it will just count the number of items in the range that you've selected. So I'm going to type equals count, open my bracket. Now again, I'm going to use that named range, but instead of typing it in this time, I'm going to press the F3 key. And F3 is amazing. So if you've got a lot of different named ranges in your spreadsheet, sometimes it's hard to remember what they're all called. If I come back to this spreadsheet in 6 months' time, I might not remember that I've named a range total sales. So if I press F3, it's going to show me all of the named ranges that I have in the spreadsheet. So you can see there, I just have one, and I can select it and close off my bracket, enter, and it's telling me that I have 500 items in this list. So that's a few different ways, or 5 different ways of doing those very basic functions. So hopefully that's kind of giving you a little bit more of an idea on different ways that you can do things and just improve your efficiency within Excel. Another little tip that I love to tell people is down here in the status bar, so right at the bottom of the screen, if you right-click your mouse, you have lots of different things in here, and you may not have delved into this area too much, but I find this really useful, particularly when I'm working with functions and formulas. I like to make sure that I have all of these ones here turned on. So I'm going to turn on average, count, minimum, maximum, and sum. Now, once you've turned those on, what that means is that if you highlight a cell range, so I'm just going to highlight these ones here, if you look down in the bottom at the status bar, it's now telling me what the average is of the range that I've selected, what the count is, what the min, what the max, and what the sum is. So I haven't had to perform any kind of calculation. I haven't had to type in a formula, and I can see those results. So if you imagine if your boss just quickly says to you, I need to know what the total sales are for all of these artists, you could come in here, you could quickly highlight that whole column, Control-Shift down, and you can see what that sum is, okay? A really nice efficiency tip when you need to do something really quickly, okay? So just a few little tips on those basic functions. Lovely. Let's move on. Now, as I said at the beginning, I want to make sure that you completely understand the difference between absolute and relative referencing, because as I said, we're going to be using that a lot as we go through this session. Now, again, I have a very basic spreadsheet here, and let's look at our data so that we understand it before we begin. We have just some employee names. So this might possibly be some HR data. So we have employee names, we have the department that those employees work in, we have the hire date, the years they've been working there, and the salary. And then we have a column that's empty, a column that says new salary. And then we have over here in cell H2, 3.3%. Now, what that is, that's the increase that all of these employees are going to get this year. So what we need to do is work out what their new salary is going to be. Excuse me. So we can do this very simply. We're going to do equals, and this is a sum calculation. So I'm going to type in equals sum. I'm going to open my bracket, and all I need to do is E3 multiplied by, and then I'm going to multiply it by the amount that we're going to increase the salary by. So I'm going to multiply it by H2. Now, there's an important point to note here. I'm using the cell reference. I haven't typed in 3.3% into my formula. I would always advise you never hard code numbers into your formulas, because what it means is that if this then changes, so maybe next year they're going to get a 4% increase, it means that you'll have to go in and update all of your formulas if you've hard coded it into here. It's much better to refer to a cell, because then all I need to do is if this percentage changes, I just need to come in here and change it in one area, okay? So we're going to refer to H2, and I'm going to close my bracket. Now, if I do that, I get 1,800. Now, that's not exactly what I want. That's telling me how much they're going to get their salary increase by. Now, what I actually want is what the new salary is going to be, so the total. So I need to make a little bit of a change here. I'm going to go in, and I am going to, onto the end, do plus, and then I want to plus E3 again. So essentially, when I hit enter, we get the total salary. And if we just recap on that formula in the formula bar, we've done E3, so the salary multiplied by 3.3%, and that gave us the amount of the increase, but then we want to know the total, so we're adding on the salary to that increase, and that gives us our total. And I could add my currency symbol just to make that a little bit more consistent. Now, that's all well and good, but look what happens when I copy this down. I'm going to double click on the little square in the corner, the autofill handle. Now, this is correct for this first one, but if we look down, you'll see that these numbers, the new salary, are exactly the same as the old salary. So there's something going wrong just here. And this is where we have absolute and relative referencing coming into play. Currently, I'm using relative referencing. That is the default in Excel. So when I copied this formula down, Excel saw that, okay, she's copying down, so I need to change the cell references. So if we go to the one below, you can see it's modified it for me. So now it's saying E4, so the salary, multiplied by, now what's it multiplying by? H3. This is cell H3. Because it's assumed I'm going down, it's moved this cell reference down. So it's now referring to an empty cell. So what we need to do is tell Excel that we always want it to refer to cell H2 as we drag down. And that is where our absolute referencing comes in. So let's edit our formula. I want to say E3 multiplied by H2, but I want to always refer to H2. So I'm going to press my F4 key. And that puts dollar signs in front of the column and the row and essentially locks it to that cell. So if I hit enter, and now if I copy down by double clicking, you'll see that we have the correct totals. And if I just pick one further down and double click so you can see, it's referring to H2. It hasn't moved down. So that is absolute referencing versus relative referencing. Okay, really important point to get your head around. I'm sure a lot of you already know that, but I just wanted to recap that before we moved on. Lovely. So now we have that in our head. Let's move on to some text functions. Now, again, when I was researching this, text functions came up over and over again, and there are a whole host of different text functions. There are so many. If you go up to your formulas ribbon, you'll see here we have our functions library. And if you click under text, you'll see how many text functions we actually have. There's quite a few different ones that you can use. And as I said, text functions are particularly useful if you're doing things like cleaning up data. So if you've imported data, maybe from a database or an external source, quite often you'll have to do some things to that data to get it into a nice, neat format before you perform an analysis. Maybe you want to do a chart or a pivot table from that data, and you need to make some cleanup on that data. This is where you'll use text functions fairly often. So I just want to show you some of the most basic ones and also how you can combine them. So again, let's look at our data. We have here again some employee details, might be some HR information. We have some employee names. We have the date they were hired, their salary, department, and job title. And currently this whole block of cells or text are in uppercase. So what I'm going to show you is just a few different functions that you can use to format and change the way this text looks. So the first two we're going to deal with are fairly straightforward. The first one is called proper case, and the function is just equals proper. Now, what this will do is it will take the text that you specify and it will change it into proper case. So currently, my employee name is in uppercase, and I want it just so that we have the first character capitalized in each word. And there's only one argument to the proper function, and that is text. So we just need to say where our text is located. So in this case, I'm working on the employee name. So I'm going to say A5 and close. A very, very straightforward function. And there we go. It's converted it into proper case. I can double click to copy that down. Now you can probably guess what's coming. We can convert to upper and also to lower case. And again, these are very, very straightforward functions, but very useful functions. So I'll quickly do these. So we've got uppercase, as you would expect, copy down. And again, lower, select your text, and it puts it into lowercase. And again, we can copy that down. Now, I want to show you a couple of other little things here. So another function that you might use when it comes to dealing with text is the length function. And this will tell you how many characters there are in whatever string of text you've selected. And again, that can sometimes be useful when used in combination with other text functions. And again, this is a very simple function, but there is a little bit of a weird thing with this. So let me just show you. The function for length is len. Open bracket, I'm going to stick with the same text, A5. I'm going to hit enter. And it's telling me that there are 13 characters in that text string. So I'm going to copy down. Now, the thing that's a little bit odd about this is that if I click on this name, and if I count, there are actually only 12 characters in this name. And Excel does count the comma and it does count spaces as characters. So it's picked up 13. Now, why has it done that when there are only 12 in here? Well, if I click in the formula bar, can you see where my cursor is flashing? There's a space before where my cursor is flashing. That space is the 13th character. Okay, now this can be a problem when you're trying to clean up data. So a function that I would always use on data is something which will remove any erroneous spaces in your text. And that function is called the trim function. So let's trim the text. Again, a very simple function. I'm going to select the name. And it will just give me the name, and I'm going to copy it down. But now if I run my len command again, or my len function, and use that text this time, it's giving me the correct character length because I've trimmed away any erroneous spaces. Okay, so trim is a really important function. It's also worth noting that a lot of these text functions can be used in combination with each other. So if you wanted to do it all in one go, so say for example, I wanted to change the employee name to proper case, and I also wanted to trim it, I can combine the two together. Again, very simple. Let's say equals proper. And then I'm going to do my trim command. So I'm essentially doubling up on my functions. And I'm going to select my text. And remember, with functions and formulas in Excel, you always have to close off as many brackets or parentheses as you've opened. So I've opened 2, which is why I've closed 2 at the end. And hit enter. Okay, so now I've done those 2 commands all in one, and you can combine loads of them together to really cut down on the amount of different columns you're having to use when you're cleaning your data. So bear that in mind, have a little play around with it, combine them together and see how you can utilize them. It will make you a lot more efficient when you're working in Excel. So a few really important points there about text functions. Let's scroll down and just look at a few others which popped up during my research. There's some other functions that you can use which are really good for extracting parts of text. So again, let's just look at our data that we're using. I have down here some, I think this is related to aircraft parts. So we have some part numbers, we have a part description, and what I want to do is essentially separate out these part numbers. So I want the country code in here, I want the identifier in here, and I want the airport code over here. So if you can imagine this in situations that you might come across, if you have sort of like long numbers, maybe phone numbers, and you want to split out maybe the area code from the rest of the number, these are the types of functions that you can use for doing things like that. So the first one we're going to use is the left function. So I'm going to say equals left. And what this does is basically what it says on the tin. It starts on the left. So you need to say, what text do you want to use? So it's the text in cell A28, comma. Now it's asking me, okay, what's the number of characters from the left that you want me to count? So I want just the country code. So I want the first 3 characters. And close my bracket. And there we go. It's separated out, and I can copy that down. I can do a similar thing to separate out the middle portion of this part number. It works in a slightly different way, but the function again is just mid. And I need to tell Excel where my text is. So here it is, comma. It's asking me for the start number. So I'm separating out this middle section just here. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is my start number, comma. How many characters do I want? Well, I want 3. Close. And there we go. I get that identifier separated out and I can copy that down. And as you can imagine, the right command is just going to work from the right. So equals right. I select my text. And again, how many characters from the right do I want to add? It's 3. Like so. And that separates out the airport. So it's really important. This works, obviously the data I've got here is fairly consistent. So this works best when you have consistent data that you want to separate out. You can use them on data that isn't so consistent like that. And that might be something which you can look at into after the session if that's something you think might be useful to you. So those are the main ones that I came across that people were saying were the most useful when they're doing things like cleaning data. So just a few text functions in there for you. Right, are we ready to move up a gear? Let's move on to some of the more complex yet very useful functions. We're going to now take a look at if statements. Now, if you've never used an if statement before, as I said, sometimes people tend to think these are quite complicated. And I did when I when I was first learning Excel. But when you break them down, they're actually not too bad. So let's look at our data. Now, you can probably tell from this that I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones recently. And the latest episode airs tonight in the UK, but I'm such a geek. I stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning to watch it when it airs live in the US. So I was up quite late last night watching it. I won't tell Adam what happened.
No spoilers, please.
Every week he says, no spoilers, so I'm not going to give you any. But it was good, is all I'm going to say. But yes, we have a little bit of a Game of Thrones theme going on in our data here. So we have some employees, we have their location, we have their job title, their hire date, the number of years they've been working there, the salary, and their job rating. Let me just scroll out a little bit. Now, what I want to do here is I want to say that everybody who has a job rating of 5, so my top employees, is going to get a bonus of $3,000. And this is where you would use an if statement. And the way I kind of figure it out is I talk it through in my head. So I'm saying if they have a job rating of 5, then I want to give them $3,000. That's how I know I need to do an if statement. So I'm going to go into here. I'm going to say equals if. I'm going to open my bracket. Now, with if statements, they require, first of all, a logical test. So what is my logical test? What am I saying here? I'm saying if the job rating equals 5, that's my logical test. So I want to say if G2 equals 5. That's my test, okay? Comma. So if that's true, if the job rating does equal 5, I'm going to give them $3,000, comma. If that logical test is false, so if they don't have a job rating of 5, unfortunately, they're going to get nothing. That is an if statement in its simplest form. Logical test, what's going to happen if that's true, and what's going to happen if it's false. Okay, and if I enter, you'll see the first one has a job rating of 1, so there's nothing there. But if I copy down, you should notice that every time we have a job rating of 5, we have $3,000 listed in there. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's expand on this idea a little bit. Now you'll see here, wherever there isn't a job rating of 5, we have a dash. Excel has automatically just put a dash in there for me. Now, you don't have to have a dash in there. You can replace that with whatever you like. So let's jump back into our formula. So instead of having a 0 in here, I'm going to say if it's false, so if they don't have a job rating of 5, I just want a blank cell. I don't want a dash, I just want a blank cell. And a blank cell in Excel is just 2 quote marks, like so. Enter. And now I have nothing in there. Okay, you could go even further if you wanted to. Let's double click, and I could put some text in here. So again, if they don't have a job rating of 5, instead of just having the double quotes, I might want to put some text in there that says no bonus. And hit enter. And again, if I copy down, I get a no bonus in the rest of those cells. So you can really customize these formulas to pretty much do or display whatever you want them to display. I'm going to do this a slightly different way now. What I'm going to do is, and again, if I scroll out slightly, I'm going to put over here a little table. So I'm going to type in here job rating, and then we're going to have a bonus column. Now you could have this on a completely different spreadsheet if you wanted to, but I'm just going to put it in here. So we're going to go all the way down for all the different job ratings. And there's going to be different levels of bonus depending on what the job rating is. So I'm going to say that if they have a job rating of 5, they get 3,000. If they have a job rating of 4, they get 2,000. If they have a job rating of 3, they get 1,500. Job rating of 2, 900. Job rating of 1, they're going to get nothing for a 1. And just to make things consistent, let me just make sure that I have a currency sign. So what I could do now, if I delete all of this out, is I could combine if statements, or I could do some nested if statements to counter for all of these different conditions. So let's go back into here and type equals. I'm going to say if. Our logical test is the same. So I'm going to say if the job rating equals, and I could type in 5, or I could use my cell reference. Now I'm going to copy this down, so I want to make sure that it's absolute. So I'm going to press my F4 key, comma. Now the value, if that's true, I'm going to say if that's true, they're going to get 3,000. So K2. And again, we're going to make that absolute because we're going to copy it down. Comma. Now I can carry on. I can do another if statement within my if statement to counter for the next one. So I could say if, open bracket, and we're going to say the same thing. So if G2 equals 4, so J3, and make that absolute by pressing F4. If that's true, then they're going to get $2,000. And again, F4 to make that absolute. And I can carry on going, comma, if. So this whole process of building up these ifs, this is called nested if statements. And you can keep going to your heart's delight. So I'm just going to do one more because I think you probably get the idea. So again, I could say if G2 equals 3, and again, make it absolute. If that's true, we're going to say they get 1,500, K4, make that absolute. And I could carry on going down. But at the moment, I'm just going to say, comma, value if false. So everybody else, they're not going to get a bonus. So we're going to say no bonus. Okay. And remember, you need to close off as many brackets as you've opened. So I think I've got 3 in here. So 1, 2, 3. Hit enter. And then copy that all the way down. You'll see here that I should have something entered for all of those ones that I entered. So I did it for 5, 4, and 3. And you can see there we have it. So we have no bonus for anyone who has a job rating that's 2 or 1. I could have included these in here if I wanted to. All right, so that's kind of how you construct an if statement and how you can build up nested if statements. Now, I did want to show you if s, which is it's a fairly new function, which just allows you to do this same thing, but in a slightly more concise way. But looking at the time, so much more to get through. We're probably not going to have time to do that. So you might want to make a note. That's something you can look at, the if-s function, IFS. It does nested if statements in a slightly more efficient way. Lovely. All right, let's move on to the next one. Now, the PMT function. Now, this is something which I use quite a lot and is used quite a lot for the financial industry. So this is when you want to work out things like loan payments. So for example, anybody who has a mortgage, and I have a mortgage, if you want to work out what your payments are going to be each month, then you can do that. Or if you want to borrow some money, how much you're going to pay each month, you can do that using the PMT function. So let's set up our scenario just here. What we're going to say is that maybe I want to buy a new car. So I want to borrow $24,000. I'm going to borrow it over a term of 60 months, which essentially equals 5 years. And the interest rate is 3.5%. And I want to calculate how much I'm going to be paying per month based on those conditions. So if I type in equals and type in PMT, open my bracket, you'll see the arguments underneath. So the first argument is rate. So my rate is 3.5%. Now there's one important thing to note here. I'm working out monthly payments. This rate is an annual rate. If you look at the table on the right-hand side, it's 3.5% per annum. So if I was just to select this cell, it's not going to work correctly because this is an annual rate and I want to work out a monthly payment. So for my rate, what I need to do is I need to say 3.5% divided by 12 to get the monthly percentage, comma. NPER, now that is number of periods or number of payments. So again, the term is 60 months. If I typed in here 5 years, again, I would have to do the cell divided by 12. So it's always good if you're working out monthly payments to put your term into months as well. I've got it as 60 months, so it's absolutely fine for me to just select cell C4, comma, and then PV, the present value. So that's essentially how much are you borrowing. So here, that's my principal. I can close off my bracket. And it tells me I'm going to be paying $436.60 per month for that amount of borrowing. Now, it's appearing in red because it's a negative value. Essentially, Excel sees this as money coming out of your account, and so it shows it as a negative value. Now, one other little trick I want to say here is I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, that's fine. I can afford that. I can actually afford $500 a month. So now I'm thinking, if I can afford $500 a month, how much can I borrow? And this is where I could use something called the goal seek command. And this is a really, really useful little function. It's not really necessarily a function, but I actually think this is quite a nice little thing to show you as well. If I go up to the data ribbon and go across to the what if analysis drop down, you have an option in there for goal seek. And it's a very simple little thing. It says set cell. So I'm going to say set cell C6, which is already selected, to 500, because that's how much I can afford each month. And I want you to change the cell here. So I want to borrow more money. If I wanted to maybe increase or decrease the term, I could have selected this cell, but I'm going to borrow more money. So I'm going to say, okay. And there we go. Excel works out that paying $500 a month means that I can borrow $27,484.99. So goal seek is a really nice little command that you can use in conjunction with the PMT function to really kind of work out what you can afford. So that's also a really nice function that you can use in business and in personal use as well. Great. Okay, let's move across. I told you that this is my favorite function, and this one comes up in every single list of top functions that you should know in Excel, and it's the mighty VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is so useful. What essentially you can do with VLOOKUP, if you've never used it before, is that you can take a piece of information and you can look it up somewhere else and return something else. So let me just clarify what I mean by that. If we go back to here, I have a list of part numbers. So maybe this is an invoice. A customer's ordered these different part numbers, and I need to populate the description and the unit price. And I have the description and the unit price and the part number listed in my parts catalog over here. So here I have part number, description, and price. So what I essentially want to do is I want to use VLOOKUP to pull through the description and the unit price using the part number. And that's a really important thing about VLOOKUP. In order to use this effectively, you need to make sure you have a piece of information that exists in both areas. So I'm using a part number here, and that part number exists in here. Okay. Now, the way that I like to do this is I like to name my data because I find it a lot easier to work with in that way. So as we did naming ranges at the beginning, I'm going to do a similar thing here. We're going to do Control A to highlight our data. And in my name box, I'm just going to call this catalog and hit enter. I'm going to go back to here. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say equals VLOOKUP. Now, my first argument, lookup value, what am I looking up? So that is going to be the piece of information that exists in both tables, which in this case is the part number B7, comma. It's now saying, okay, where do you want me to find this part number? What is the table array? Now, I've named my table array catalog, so I can just press my F3 key. Remember, that will bring up all of your named ranges, and I can select catalog, comma. It's now saying, okay, I'm looking up this part number in this table array catalog. Which column of information do you want me to pull back? Now, the description was in column 2, and this is what you need to remember with VLOOKUP is VLOOKUP numbers its columns from left to right. So the description was in column 2, comma. And it's saying to me, do I want to do an approximate match or an exact match? Well, I want it to exactly match the part number. So I'm going to say false. Close my bracket. Hit enter. And it's pulled that back very nicely. And if I copy that down, there we go. Now you see here we have an NA. So this part number has not been found in this table. So I could counter for that. And this is a good way of using error checking functions as well, which are also really, really important. If I don't want this to say NA, maybe I just want it to say part not found. If I go back into my formula, and I'm going to edit this in the formula bar at the top here, I could add a little bit of error checking into here to counter for any NAs. So I'm going to type at the start here, if NA. So if you find an NA error, we're going to have our VLOOKUP, and then on the end, we're going to say, if you find it, then just add not found, like so. Hit enter. And now if I copy that down, you'll see it now replaces that NA with not found. So if NA is a nice error checking formula, and you can add whatever you like into here. Again, if I didn't want any text, I could just use the double quote marks like we used before. Okay, so that's a VLOOKUP in its most basic form. Let's do it again for unit price. Now let's just refer back to catalog. Remember what I was saying. So VLOOKUP will number the table from left to right. So this is column 1, that's column 2, the price is column 3. So this time we're pulling through the price. So we want to reference column 3. So let's do it again. Equals VLOOKUP, oops, equals VLOOKUP. Open bracket. Our lookup value is still our part number, comma. Our table array. Again, I could press F3 to pull up my table array, or I could just start to type it. So catalog is the array, comma. The column index number, this time it's column 3 that we're pulling back, comma, and I want to do an exact match. Now I could type in false, but remember in Excel, you can also type in 0 for false and 1 for true. So I could type in just 0 on the end, which will do the same as false, like so. And then it pulls those through. And again, if you wanted to, you could add on that if NA at the beginning, just to counter for any errors that you might get. So again, I could type in not found, like so. So that is a VLOOKUP in its most basic form. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. We're running out of time so desperately. I just want to show you these last few things, so please do bear with me. Now, there is another condition on VLOOKUP. If you remember, when we've done these last two VLOOKUPs, we've done the false condition every time, and false looks for an exact match. So in this example, we were looking for exactly the part number, which is why we had false on the end. Now, there is a true condition, which is where you're doing an approximate match. And this would be the kind of example that you might have where you would use an approximate match or that true argument on the end. So again, here we have a little table that has some annual salaries, and we want to look up the marginal tax rate in this table at the top here. So we use an approximate match because if we look here, annual salary 55,000 doesn't exactly exist. We've got a range. So 55,000 is going to fall somewhere in between the low end and the high end. We don't have exactly the word 55,000 written in here. And this is where we would use that approximate match. So I'll just very quickly do this because it's virtually the same. It's just a slightly different argument on the end. So I'm going to say VLOOKUP, open bracket. Lookup value is 55,000, comma, table array. Now I haven't named my table this time, so I can just select it if I want to. But if I do that, I need to make sure that it's absolute because I'm going to drag this formula down and I always want it to reference that table, that fixed range. Comma. It's now asking me for my column index number. So I'm pulling back the marginal tax rate. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Column number 4, comma. And this time I'm doing an approximate match. So we're typing in true. And there we go. And I should now be able to drag that down. And let's just do a quick check. So 55,000 falls in between here. And that tax rate is 25%. 8699 is up here, which is 10%. So that all looks good to me. So that's the difference between that false condition and that true condition. Very, very quickly, HLOOKUP. HLOOKUP is in the same family. So the only difference between VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP is that VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup and HLOOKUP stands for horizontal. So you would use an HLOOKUP if your data is running in a different way across the page. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Let me go to the catalog and I'm going to highlight Control A, the entire catalog, and I'm going to copy it, Control C. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this, but I'm going to paste it the other way round so that the column headings are actually running down the rows. And there's a quick way that you can paste data the opposite way round. If we go to the home ribbon and click on the bottom of the paste button and go to paste special, the transpose option in here will essentially switch your data around when you paste it. Now, it's not the nicest way of displaying this data, but it illustrates the point. We now have our headings running down this way. So a VLOOKUP wouldn't work on this data. We would need to do an HLOOKUP. Okay, so again, let me just name this data very quickly. I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to call this catalog 2. Catalog 2. And if we go back over here, I'm just going to delete out what we have. And this time I'm going to say HLOOKUP, open bracket. My lookup value is still going to be the same. It's still going to be B7. My table array this time is catalog 2, comma. Now this time it's asking me for a row index number. When you do the VLOOKUP, it asks for a column index number. So this time I'm looking for row number 2, comma, and I'm doing an exact match. So I want false in there. And there we go. So it basically does the same thing, but you used it when you have your data running in the opposite way. The last example, now I'm just noting the time. It is 2 minutes over time. Does everybody have time for me to run through this very final example? Can you stay on for another 5 minutes, or would you like me to stop now? Adam, what do you think? What are people saying?
Yeah, we've still got most people in the room.
Yeah.
Just drop us a note in the comment. I think we should be okay. There's a couple of people that have had to go. Yeah, most people are saying yes. So
Yep, excellent.
let's go ahead. Let's do index match, because this is always a fun one. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. All right. So this should only take about 5 minutes, but it's a really, really important thing to learn. And again, index and match are 2 separate functions. I can't stress that enough, because I think people hear them so often used together that they tend to think that index match is all one function, but it's not. It's actually 2 separate functions that are really powerful when you use them together. And they are lookup functions. So in the same vein as VLOOKUP, but they're much more powerful when combined together. VLOOKUP has its limitations. As you've probably seen, when you use a VLOOKUP, you look up data from left to right. So it can only look for data that's to the right of your lookup value, because you have to use the column number going this way. Now, with index match, you can basically look for data in a table wherever its location is, and wherever its location is in relation to what you're actually looking up. So it's a lot more powerful than VLOOKUP. So I'm going to show you the functions separately first of all. So I'm going to show you index first, then I'm going to show you match, and I'm going to show you how powerful they are when used together. So in this example, what we have here are a list of universities in the US, their rank, the university name, the tuition, and the total number of people graduating. And then what I have over here is a little table, and we've got the rank, so 1 to 5. And what I want to do is I want to look up the rank in this table and pull back the school name and the tuition fee, essentially. Okay, so let me show you what index does first of all. I'm going to type in equals index, open bracket. Now, the first thing the index does is it asks you for an array. Now, the way that I like to think about this is I like to say to myself, okay, well, what am I looking up here? I'm looking up the school name. So my index is essentially going to be all of the school names, comma. It's saying, okay, which school name do you want me to pull back? What's the row number? So I'm looking for the one that's in the first ranked position, which if I scroll down is Yale University. That's the result I'm expecting. Now, Yale University, the position it's in is position number 16. I've counted down, and that is position 16 in this list. So I want to tell Excel, pull back row number 16. Close my bracket. And it pulls back Yale University. Now, that's all well and good, but I only have a small data set here. Do you really want to be counting down the row number every single time you do this? What if you have 50,000 rows of data? It's going to be impossible. So in this way, index isn't particularly helpful unless you have a small data set. So what we essentially want to do is we want to try and automate the finding of this row number. And that is where the match command comes in. So let me show you what match does on its own. I'm going to say equals match, open bracket. So it's saying, what's my lookup value? So in this case, what am I looking up in this table? I'm looking up the rank, and I am looking it up in this list just here. And I am doing an exact match. And it gives me the position. So hopefully you can see now how we can combine index and match together to pull back what we're looking for. So let's combine them together. Equals index, open bracket. My array, what am I looking for? I'm looking for that school name. So I'm going to highlight. And remember, again, you could name this range. So you could use the named range instead of the references just here, comma. Now it's asking me for row number. So before we told it what row number, but this time we're going to get match to do that work. So I want to say match, open bracket. And we're going to do basically what we did before. We want to match the lookup value, comma. Our lookup array is where we're going to find it, comma. And we're doing an exact match, so a 0 on the end. I need to close off as many brackets as I've opened, which is 2. Hit enter, and it pulls that back for me. Now I could copy this down, but if I do, it's not going to work at the moment. I need to make my cell references for my tables absolute. So again, if I press F4 on these, and again, you could get around this by naming the range, but I will just make these absolute. Like so, and then I can drag that down and it gives me my list. All right. Now, I was going to show you tuition. I'm going to leave that because it's pretty much exactly the same. It might be something that you can work through. As I said, you're going to get this spreadsheet after this session. So it's good for you to be able to work through and maybe do the tuition one yourself as a little practice. It's very similar to what we've done just here, just a couple of little changes. But hopefully that kind of demystifies index match a little bit for you. It is quite complicated if you've not used it before, but if you just break it down into exactly what it is that you're doing and work it through in your head, I find that with practice over time, it tends to make a little bit more sense. I realize that was a very, very quick run through and you're probably like, right now, but hopefully it just gives you a starting point as well. I'm going to leave it there, guys, because we are running over time. Thank you so much for hanging on. I will pass back to Adam for any questions we might have before we finish up today.
Thanks, Debs. That was great. Really, really good. Loads of interesting stuff in there. We have one question actually that I think's worth answering. If you know the answer, is there an easy way to use the column headers to name ranges? Because we've talked a lot about ranges and naming ranges in this thing. Is there a shortcut? Basically, I think that was from James earlier on.
There absolutely is. I'm very glad you asked that. Let me just do a quick tab. Hang on one second. I actually run a session on naming ranges and we cover this in that session. So let me just do something very basic here. I'm going to do, maybe we've got a list of expenses that you might spend each month. So maybe you spend on, I can't spell today, utilities. I think that's still wrong. Let's say you spend on the gym and we have money on going out. So maybe these are some expenses that you have each month. And maybe your rent is 500, utilities are 100, the gym is 50, and going out 250, something along those lines. So if I had some information like this and I wanted to name these ranges based on these headings here. So if I wanted to essentially name this range here as rent, I could do that. So if I go up to, where are we? Formulas. What you can do is you can say, I think it comes under create from selection. So if I was to select this top one like that, I can say create from selection and it will say left column. So wherever you've got the text, so in this example, in the left column, and click on OK, it then creates that range. So you can see it's created rent. So I could do it for the rest of them if I highlight all of them and say create from selection, left column, okay? It's now created all those ranges for me just by using the name, the heading, essentially. Hopefully that answers your question.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a real useful one, actually. I didn't know that at all. I need to attend your name ranges
Yeah.
session. Cool. So that's it for today, guys. My only observation is that I love that Debs gave her favourite character in Game of Thrones the highest salary, Jorah Mormont. If you missed that, everybody.
Love
But
Jorah.
yeah.
R.I.P. Jorah.
I know. But thanks so much for attending, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. Really appreciate it. And yeah, a couple of more things. We have just launched Project 2019. Deb's actually authored that one. So if you're interested in Microsoft Project, then let us know. Larissa's just asking, do you have training in payroll? We have a QuickBooks course. It does include some payroll stuff, but it's specific to QuickBooks rather than general payroll. All of our courses and everything, of course, available at simonsays.com and streamskill.com. Yeah, you can subscribe as a member for a low monthly fee. On webinars, we are going to take a short break from webinars just for the next couple of months because we've got a lot of Microsoft courses that we need to get finished off, and that is sort of where Debs is helping us. And although these webinars only take an hour, they actually take quite a long time to prepare and rehearse and all that kind of stuff. There is a surprising amount of effort that goes into these presentations, which is especially annoying when they sort of go wrong in the live sessions. But yeah, it will just be a short break. We will be back a little bit later in the year with that, and also we'll have a load of new courses on the websites as well for you all to enjoy. So thank you so much, everybody, and yeah, keep the suggestions coming for future webinars, of course. And yeah, of course, there's going to be a downloadable video of this webinar. Well, we're going to host it on our site, probably, Ronald. It'll be on simonsays.com. And yeah, thank you, everybody. So that's it from us. I'm off to watch this week's episode of Game of Thrones. I'm sure there might be a few others doing the same today if you haven't already. But yeah, have a great summer. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Have a great summer, everyone, as well. And we'll see you soon. That's it from Adam and Debs for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.